We're filming today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive in Manhattan. I'm very pleased to have Ron Carter with me in between sets at the Iridium.
Nice to be here with you.
Can you tell me very quickly, when you were a child, was classical music prevalent in your household?
I think music in general was.
Mm-hmm.
I think musicians of my age category, all studied classical music because there was no jazz school and there were no jazz teachers who would come through the city often enough to make lessons productive.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all studied, but the teachers we studied with were those at the local music school or in the elementary high school music program. So while classical music was not the primary focus of music in my house, those were only teachers who were around teaching music, and they were classical players.
Yeah.
We played in classical orchestras and classical concerts just as time as we moved on to the next stage of our musical careers.
Right. When you moved to Detroit, was there a healthy jazz scene in Detroit at that time?
Oh yeah, there were 3 or 4 major clubs that brought in major acts. And when I left Detroit and went away to school, the first gig I had on the road was at a club in Detroit it was called Club 7, with Chico Hamilton's band. Mm-hmm. And across town was Ahmad Jamal's band. And about 8 blocks away was T-Bone Walker, the great blues guitarist. Mm-hmm. and of course the local musicians always had 4 or 5 little small places to play, so jazz was really alive and well. Mm-hmm. We're talking about 55 through probably 65, 70, for 15 years, 20 years or so. It was really a hotbed of jazz activity.
How about at Eastman? Was there a recognized jazz program at Eastman when you were there?
They didn't recognize the music. They didn't have a program. Mm-hmm. No.
But you were playing bass in the orchestra.
In the Eastman Philharmonic, I was the first African American in the orchestra, and when they put together what's now known as the Eastman Philharmonic School Ensemble, it was composed of the better players of the school at that time. This would be my last year, 58 to 59. And when they put together a student ensemble, I was the first bassist in that orchestra. No, but jazz wasn't recognized and certainly wasn't taught as a part of the school academic program.
Yeah. Were you able to, wasn't there the Pithod room?
I started the music policy there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's over in the way across town from Eastman School, physical location. And I'd play that 2 or 3 nights a week, or go up to Syracuse or Utica. There's a whole trunk line at that time.
Yeah.
The trunk line from Canada to New York was kind of on the thruway. The train was followed the thruway route. You had Utica, Little Falls, Herkimer, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. Then you end up in New York,
Wow.
And so I'd be making gigs up there, those towns on weekends, and driving back to school for 8 o'clock third class Monday morning.
It's an accomplishment that you made it through that kind of schedule.
Well, you don't think it's difficult.
Right.
It's the only way you can see to get it done.
Yeah. How'd your professors feel about that, or wasn't it even an issue for them?
Well, most of them didn't really care as long as I got to class on time and did the homework. Some of them didn't care for that kind of music, so they didn't like what I did in the interim from classes. And the school did not encourage a jazz profile. And the strange thing is, at that time, there was the Eastman Theater. There's a show called Jazz for Moderns, a package show that travels throughout the country, And they played at the Eastman Theater. It was a wonderful auditorium. It seats maybe 2,000 people. And they had great bands going all through Rochester. There's a place called the Ridgegrass Inn, where singles would work. I played with Sonny Stitt as a side man, and I saw Horace play there with Art Farmer and Clifford Jordan, and I saw Dizzy Gillespie's band, I saw Carmel McRae's band, I saw Oscar Peterson's band. I mean, for all the music in the town, it seemed pretty strange that they would not acknowledge its existence.
Right.
And this Jazz for Modern show that traveled down the same New York State Thruway line. The show was Lambert Hemmingskin Ross, Dave Brubeck Quartet, Maynard Ferguson big band with Wayne Short and Sly Hampton, and Miles' band with
Wow.
Train and Philly and Paul and Red Garland. So when you have that kind of music in town, with people who are the force in music, it's hard to understand how a classical institution would continue to ignore its presence.
Right at that time, when you were about to graduate from Eastman, what were your career aspirations at then?
Well, I thought that, making gigs is one thing, $20 a night and you play your brains out and have a great time, but I wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to do, and seeing what appeared to be a relatively stable financial environment as a classical orchestral player, I said, well, I'm spending 4 years here, and this is my last 2 weeks at school. I may as well find out what the deal is. And Leopold Stokowski, who was one of the guest conductors of the Philharmonic when I was there, took me aside when he was there for the 1 week, and the last day, it was like a 4-day week. He'd conduct 4 days and play the concert that night. And I had a chance to play under some great conductors with this Eastman Philharmonic Orchestra. He told me he'd like to have me in his orchestra down in Houston, but that he felt that the board of directors weren't ready to have a black person in the orchestra. I said, well, if this is what they're telling him,
Wow.
He's a major conductor and they're one of the major orchestras, I mean, really.
Yeah, and that was...
So he was blunt. He laid it right out, And to this day, if you look at the major orchestras, they still haven't made a dent in the African-American musicians scene.
Yeah.
I mean, New York maybe has one, maybe Cleveland maybe has one, Detroit maybe has one, Chicago maybe has one, maybe not. I mean, the music hasn't they haven't shared the musical wealth with people.
And the young black musician nowadays is not going to be encouraged
to
go that route anyway.
Why would he be encouraged, man?
Right.
I mean, the Philharmonic in New York, they go to the Abyssinian Baptist Church. It's a major church in New York. They go every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. They play one concert and split. I mean, if the kids are aware, and they seem to be, to look at the orchestra, man, and say there's only one of them looks like them, and the orchestra plays and runs. I mean, what kind of encouragement is that, man? So it's a topic that kind of wears me out, and since I got to go to work, I don't want to spend too much time on it.
Right, okay.
But they're not prepared for the African-American musician.
Yeah.
And haven't been for as long as I can tell.
Okay. New York seemed an inevitable for you after Rochester?
Well, having done some freelance work at this Ridgecrest Inn Club and met some musicians who we would talk after the gigs and between classes, they said New York always has room for a good bass player. I should come to New York and try my hand. So when I graduated in June, moved to New York in August.
Seemed to had a pretty, wasn't too long before you were playing with some pretty good people, Chico Hamilton and
It's my first gig out of town. I got to New York, we left then 2 weeks of coming to New York.
He decided to go west and you stayed.
Eric Dolphin and I stayed in New York, and Chico and the band disbanded, and Chico and the band went to California. The guitar player is now one of the oldest studio guys, and cello player's probably retired. He's probably close to 85, 90 by now, so the band disbanded.
When you were with Miles, I was just looking at some dates today, and I guess I didn't quite realize that everyone in that band was a young man. You were in your 26 or something like that, and of course Tony Williams was younger, and Herbie was about
17, so Herbie was like 24.
It seems amazing now when you look back at the creativity that was going on. And did you guys have a sense that you were kind of, I don't know, making history is a good word, but you had far-reaching effects?
I think no, for a couple of reasons. When you're in the middle of this development, you're not able to really step outside and see what's taking place because you're too busy in the development, And the people who were making the historical notes, literary notes, didn't really acknowledge the band's impact on music, and that hasn't really happened. There've been some term papers, some theses for doctoral degrees, and an occasional 3 paragraphs in the book, but there hasn't really been the in-depth analogy and acknowledgement that band was an important band in the annals of history, you know. And anything, given that time, 63 to 68, when there wasn't the kind of critical acclaim that some other people may have gotten, and because we were in the middle of this evolving situation and developing music, no one, I think, realized that it was as impactful as it was.
Yeah.
We just had a good time playing. We had a good time becoming dear friends, and a great time trying to play some good music every night.
Was there any talking about what you were trying to do beforehand, or was it evolving as you played?
There was conversation in as much as we would say, well, that didn't work, maybe if we move it over here, maybe that'll work. Or someone may question, when we play double time, are we cutting the bars in half? Or are we still making the bars stay as they are, only with eighth notes as being important rather than 4 quarter notes being important, you know? Do we want to change keys? Maybe we're in the wrong key. You know, do we want to maybe not do this? Those kind of general questions were always a part of our conversation. I think one thing that helped us develop whatever it is finally discussed as what was developed was that we played a small library. We played maybe 15 to 20 tunes for those 5 years. And because we got a chance to play the song in its original form as often and get out as much as those ordinary forms and ordinary changes offered us, it gave us a chance to develop a different set of chords based on this kind of historical background of the song that we had played through. And I think because we had a smaller library and weren't forced to fight for the notes, or fight for the changes, or fight for the melodies every night, or fight for the form, because the library was small enough to allow us that latitude. Well, we know what this form is, because we've been playing this form for a year. So we make the form go like this. We still know that it started out like this from having this 1 year of intense exposure to this tune. You know, so I think that's part of the discussion that we would have. But it wouldn't be to a lab and a microscope saying, "Hey, man, check this out."
Was it kind of a shock to go from, you know, jazz musicians spend a lot of time learning songs with lots of changes and how to negotiate all that in the bop, and then to go to have a tune like So What, where you have 2 chords. Was it like, wow, this is really something different?
Well, maybe for the musicians in 1959, but by the time 63 had rolled around, it'd been thrown around enough time at jam sessions and gigs that some people understood what the choices were, and that for as many choices as there were, they would eliminate some of them. You know, so for us, it was just a matter of what are the best ones of the choices. Can we make them sound musical and reasonable every night?
Okay, just to wrap up here, I was looking at a book entitled 100 Best Jazz Albums. It's Len Lyons. You're on at least 5 of them.
Wow.
Maybe you can make a quick comment about some of the things you mentioned. 4 and More.
That was done at Lincoln Center. People don't realize that Miles was a real civil activist, and he would often play for these civil rights fundraisers. And that night it was a fundraiser for some civil rights group. I can't remember, NAACP or something like that. We've been off about 3 months, and he told us this is a benefit. I said, so me being, I guess, the spokesperson of the band, said, it's a benefit, okay? Well, why don't you benefit them and let us have our money? And if I decide I want to benefit them, I'll give them a share of my salary. And he said, he didn't think so. So I said, well, I'd have to go home, man. And he asked me, was I serious? I said, yes. How dare you benefit my money? And he said, okay. And we got paid, and whatever happened, happened. You know? But none of us knew this was being recorded. We didn't know it was recorded until a year after the record was out. So it's a whole other process, a whole other thing on the scene. You know? That's one of the stories behind that record.
Okay. Miles Smiles.
I think what I remember about that record was wishing that we had chance to develop that music on the bandstand. Most of the recorded songs were just played on the record. You know, of maybe the 20 records we made, maybe 5, 8 of the small group records. That's maybe 7 songs a record. That's probably 50 songs. Maybe 8 or 9 of them got played live to really develop them. And I'm sorry that songs on that record didn't really get the development that I would have wished they could have had.
A couple with Herbie Hancock, Maiden Voyage and Speak Like a Child.
Well, I'm sorry Herbie doesn't write arrangements like Speak Like a Child anymore, because they were fabulous. They really
Gorgeous.
showed his ability to encapsulate an emotion with more than 3 players,
Mhm.
you know, and for whatever reason he's decided that he's done that already. He's on to other things that are just as interesting and productive, you know. For me, it was a chance to play some really well-written music
Yeah.
by a guy who I'm really close to, and I regret that he hasn't done more of that.
Yeah.
Maiden Voice, just fun. We rehearsed for 2 days at a rehearsal hall and went to the studio and made the record in one day.
Someone said you've played on about 1,000 records.
It's over 2,000.
Over 2,000,
Yeah.
so
I've been busy.
yeah.
Somebody's got to do it. Man.
Right. Thanks for your time. I know you have to go put some music together
I'm trying to work on it right now
for the
as we
next
speak.
set. And best of luck with your Brazilian project
Thank
that
you.
you were telling me about.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you sneaking up here for some time.
I'm sorry I missed you yesterday, but now we got
I
it
know.
squared away.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very much.